Thursday Nightmares channel.
It was a humid night in November 1964. It was supposed to be a simple trip to a party in another town, but it ended up being the worst nightmare of my life. My friends, Julio, Roberto, and Isabella, and I were excited, as always. I took my dad's car without asking, and we left full of plans. There was beer, jokes, and that euphoria of people who don't think about the consequences. The road was deserted, no one was around. Only the sound of the engine, the car radio, and our laughter broke the silence of that hot night. Isabella, in the front seat, was laughing at a joke Julio had just told, and I was a bit distracted by the conversation and the beer I had already drunk. I pressed the gas pedal, feeling invincible, like any 17-year-old who thinks they know everything. Then, out of nowhere, came the impact. It was as if the world froze for a second. The car jolted, and everything went quiet. My heart started racing. I had hit something. Julio asked what it was, and all I could think about was that I had messed everything up, that I had wrecked my dad's car. Without thinking much, I stopped the car and got to check the damage. Outside, the darkness was terrifying. The headlights only lit up a small stretch of the road, and the rest was pitch black. I walked to the front of the car, trembling, expecting to see a body, a dead animal, something. But there was nothing. No blood, no signs of an accident. Just a dented bumper and fur. For God's sake. It was fur, thick, like a dog's, stuck to the bumper. That's when I heard it. A growl, low and deep, coming from the darkness beside the road. The sound froze my blood. My feet were glued to the ground for a second, but adrenaline made me run back to the car, almost tripping on the way. "There's something out there," I shouted, terrified, as I tried to start the car. "What do you mean something? What did you see?" asked Isabella, her voice trembling, almost panicking. "I didn't see it. I heard it. We need to get out of here. Now." I turned the key, but the car wouldn't start. That annoying sound of the engine trying to turn over without success only made my panic worse. Outside, the growl turned into something much worse. It sounded like claws scraping the asphalt, getting closer and closer. Julio, in the back seat, was staring out the window with wide eyes. "It's coming, damn it, Guilherme, start the thing," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. I tried again and again, but the car just died completely. There was nothing else we could do. We all went silent, listening to that thing getting closer. The sound of claws and the deep growl made my heart pound in my chest. When I saw it, it felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. It was huge, bipedal, covered in shiny black fur, with red eyes that seemed to look straight into my soul. That thing was a werewolf. There was no other explanation. The elongated snout, the sharp teeth showing, the claws scraping the ground. I couldn't move. My body was frozen with pure terror. Suddenly, red lights began to flash in the rearview mirror. A police siren cut through the silence, and I almost cried with relief. The werewolf stopped and looked back, as if it was considering what to do. In a movement too fast for something that big, it jumped into the woods and disappeared into the darkness. The police car stopped beside us, and 2 officers got out with flashlights. "What happened here?" one of them asked, looking at me with a serious expression. "Here is the translation of your text into American English with the necessary spelling and grammatical corrections." I didn't even know where to start. My mouth was dry, my head was spinning. Julio tried to say something, stammering about a wolf we had hit, but none of us could really explain it. The officer shined his flashlight on the front of the car and saw the fur stuck to the bumper. He frowned but didn't say anything. "You're lucky we were around," said the officer, looking directly at me. "You shouldn't be drinking and driving." All I could do was nod, still trembling. The officers told us to get into the patrol car, saying they were going to tow the car. Nobody argued. I was in shock, just like everyone else. As we drove away, Isabella looked out the window and told me she had seen something moving between the trees. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I knew, somehow, that thing was still watching us. Whatever it was, this wasn't over. The silence inside the patrol car was unbearable. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, heavy, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Julio, Roberto, and Isabella were also quiet, but the panic in the air was palpable. The officer driving seemed oblivious, but for a moment I thought he looked nervous too, like he knew there was something strange about that road. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. A howl. Loud and strong, it echoed across the entire road, as if it came from all directions at once. My body froze, and I saw the officer in the front exchange a glance with his partner. The patrol car slowed down. "Did you hear that?" asked the officer in the passenger seat, gripping his flashlight. "I heard it," the other one replied, keeping his eyes on the road. Without another word, he pulled the car over onto the shoulder. The red lights kept flashing, illuminating the darkness around us. Outside, the sound of the howl faded, but the air felt heavy. A weight hung over everything, like something was about to happen. "What are you doing?" Julio finally broke the silence, his voice trembling. "Hang on, kid," the officer replied, as if trying to stay in control. "Stay inside the car." The two officers got out of the patrol car, each holding a flashlight. They began walking down the road, shining their lights into the woods around us. I kept staring at the door, fighting the urge to run, but where would we go? There was nowhere to run. And then I saw it. In the middle of the darkness, a shadow. At first, it seemed like just a darker spot, almost invisible in the night, but then it moved. And it was getting closer, slowly, but with terrifying certainty. It was the werewolf. It hadn't left. "It's there," I whispered, barely able to breathe. "It's coming back." Isabella began crying softly. Roberto stayed silent, his eyes wide, staring out the window. Julio tugged at my shirt. "Here's the translation of your text into American English with the necessary spelling and grammatical corrections." "Guilherme, what do we do, man? What do we do?" His voice was barely audible. Before I could answer, we heard a scream from outside. A short, muffled scream. The officer from the passenger seat, the one who had gotten out first, disappeared into the shadows. The other officer turned his flashlight in that direction, his hand trembling, and the light caught the horrific scene for just a second. The officer was on the ground, his body twisted, being dragged into the woods. I saw the claws of that thing gripping his legs, pulling him away as he desperately tried to hold onto the ground, his fingernails scratching the asphalt. But it was useless. The scream stopped, and the officer was gone. The other officer tried to run to help, but before he could take 2 steps, the werewolf appeared again. It jumped out of the shadows with a speed that didn't seem possible for something that size. The flashlight beam shook as the officer tried to aim, but it was too late. One strike with those enormous claws, and he fell to the ground, his chest ripped open, his blood spilling onto the asphalt. Inside the patrol car, no one moved. I could hear each of us breathing heavily, paralyzed by fear. The werewolf was slowly approaching the car, its red eyes glowing in the darkness, as if savoring us from a distance. "Guilherme, we have to get out of here," Roberto whispered, his face pale with fear. "And how?" I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. "There's nowhere to run." Isabella was staring at me, tears streaming down her face. Julio leaned forward and grabbed the gun the officer had left in the car when he got out. "Don't ask me why. We're going to have to get out of here," he said, his voice trembling but determined. Before we could come up with any plan, the werewolf attacked. It slammed into the side of the car with such force that the vehicle rocked, like it was being shoved by an unimaginable strength. The window next to Isabella cracked from the impact, and she screamed. With a trembling hand, Julio unlocked the gun. He fired 2 shots, but the gunfire only echoed into the night, with no visible effect. The werewolf growled, irritated, and struck the car again, denting the door. "Get out! Get out of the car, damn it!" I shouted, pulling the door with all the strength I had. I ran out of the patrol car, with Julio and Roberto right behind me. Isabella was frozen for a few seconds, but soon followed us. We ran down the road without looking back, hearing the creature's growls getting closer and closer. The patrol car's lights grew more distant, and all that remained was the sound of our heavy breathing and the rustling of the woods around us. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. The night wasn't going to end well. We ran as if death itself was chasing us, and, in a way, it was. The werewolf was behind us, its roars tearing through the silence of the night. Every step seemed faster than the last, and I knew that, in a matter of seconds, it would be on top of us. We can't keep running like this, I shouted, trying to catch my breath. Here is the translation of your text into American English, with the necessary spelling and grammatical corrections. Julio was next to me, still holding the officer's gun, but with every shot, the creature only seemed to get angrier. Roberto tripped over a root sticking out of the ground, and for a moment, I thought it was the end. He fell face first onto the ground, letting out a groan of pain. Julio and I stopped immediately to help him, and Isabella, who was right behind us, started screaming. I looked back and saw the werewolf's red eyes glowing in the darkness, getting closer and closer. Julio was pulling Roberto with all his strength, but panic was slowing us down. He could barely stand, and the creature was now less than 20 meters away. That's when I heard it. A noise. The rumble of an engine. I looked at the road and saw headlights emerging on the horizon. A pickup truck was coming our way, fast. The road. I yelled, pulling Roberto with everything I had. He was limping, but we managed to drag him along. Isabella ran ahead, desperately trying to get the driver's attention. The werewolf was almost on top of us, its threatening growl like thunder about to strike. The truck driver saw what was happening, and to our relief, sped up. I heard the engine roar louder, and before the werewolf could leap at us, it was hit squarely by the front of the vehicle. The creature flew a few meters, crashing hard onto the asphalt. For a second, silence fell over the road. The truck came to a screeching halt, and a large man, dressed in farmer's clothes, got out, holding a shotgun. He looked at us, not fully understanding what was happening, but the horrified look on his face showed he had seen the werewolf. "Get in the back. Now!" he shouted, pointing to the bed of the truck. Without hesitation, we ran and climbed in. The man didn't wait a second before reversing and speeding off. The werewolf, which was already starting to get up, growled loudly but grew smaller as we sped away. In the back of the truck, no one could speak. The air was heavy, as if the terror was still choking us. The man drove fast, his hands gripping the wood tightly, not looking back. Only when the city appeared on the horizon did we start to breathe properly. The werewolf had vanished into the darkness, but the images of the night were still burned into my mind. "Are you all okay?" the driver finally asked, breaking the silence. I looked at my friends. Roberto's face was smeared with blood, but he seemed conscious. Isabella was trembling so much she could barely speak. Julio was breathing heavily, clutching the gun like it was the only thing keeping him alive. "I think so," I answered, unsure. We arrived in town, and the man dropped us off near a police station. He didn't seem to want to get involved any further, and I didn't blame him. There was no rational explanation for what happened on that road. Who would believe that a werewolf had attacked us? We stumbled into the station like we had just walked out of a nightmare. We tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out confused. The officers listened with skeptical looks, jotting everything down, but not believing a word. In the end, we went home with a story no one would ever believe. But I knew, deep down, that the werewolf was still out there. On that road. Waiting.